Okay, I am officially committing, and I tried to do this before. We did not follow through to my shame. We are going to do better about reporting on Sudan. Um, I don't think it's either or, but you will have some people will say, well, why do you cover Palestine, but you don't cover Sudan? And it's not that I think we cover Palestine too much. I think we cover Sudan too little. And it is partly because it's a vicious circle. Nobody covers it, so it doesn't come up on your radar. Like you don't see it in your news. So you have to seek it out. You really have to make an effort. Why? That's a good question, and in our research, I'm sure we'll come across some answers. So we're having some technical problems today, but we will work through it as best we can. Okay, so a lot of refugees are fleeing from Darfur into Chad right now. Many are children arriving alone, dehydrated, malnourished. This entire region right now is being afflicted with war and civil war. The UN is trying to feed and house the refugees, but with very limited resources. You can see here the conditions people there are living in. And this is actually Iranian TV, press TV. A UN convoy carrying humanitarian aid to the city of El Fasher was attacked by the Rapid Support Militia's drone in Western Sudan. So this was just breaking before we went on the air. So you can see the remnants of the food aid that was supposed to be reaching these people. Multiple casualties reported after attack on UN aid convoy in Darfur. A UN aid convoy carrying critical food supplies to a famine threatened city in western Sudan has been targeted in a brutal attack that appeared to have caused multiple casualties. A number of trucks belonging to the UN's food and children's agencies were attacked as they headed toward Al Fasher, capital of North Darfur, which has been besieged by the paramilitary rapid support forces for more than a year. As details of the atrocity emerged, the UN's refugee agency confirmed the number of people who had fled the country since Sudan's civil war began had surpassed 4 million and warned that the scale of displacement was putting regional and global stability at stake. The attack on the aid convoy occurred about 45 miles, 75 kilometers from El Fasher and Al Qoma, a stronghold of the RSF. This was put out by the UN World Food Program. This statement: we are shocked and alarmed that WFP premises in El Fasher, Sudan have been hit and damaged by RSF repeated shelling. WFP staff are safe and accounted for. Humanitarian staff, assets, operations, and supplies should never be a target. This must stop now. So not only are they hitting the aid convoys, they're hitting their bases inside the city. Alcoma was the location of another atrocity at the weekend when an airstrike on a civilian market by the Sudanese army reportedly killed at least 89 people. The area is firmly under the control of the RSF, with aid trucks forced to navigate a series of the paramilitary group's checkpoints to reach El Fasher. However, the attackers of the convoy have not yet been officially identified. Last week, the WFP expressed shock after its premises in El Fasher were repeatedly shelled by the RSF. Al Fasher is home to about 2 million people, including about 800,000 internally displaced persons who fled the city from across Darfur, and it remains the only one of 5 state capitals in the Darfur region not to fall under RSF control. In recent months, it has endured daily shelling amid an ever tightening siege. Within the city itself, food supplies are running so low that the UN has warned of famine. Activists trapped within El Fasher have said thousands of people face starvation as essential foods and medicines disappear from markets because of the RSF siege. Speaking to the activist network Avaz several days ago, A volunteer called Adam said community kitchens in the city no longer had access to maize or wheat. Quote, "We used to have goods coming in regularly through vehicles, but now the only goods that enter the city come on donkeys. For the entire city of El Fasher, we have no more than 10 donkeys that enter the city carrying goods per day. Even these people carrying limited supplies on their donkeys get questioned and interrogated at RSF checkpoints. The civil war, now in its third year, has caused the world's biggest humanitarian crisis. In addition to the 4 million people who have now fled Sudan, a record 11.6 million people have also been displaced within the country, about half of whom are in the Darfur region. Both the Sudanese army and the RSF have been accused of myriad war crimes and using starvation as a weapon of war. So now, why is Sudan not getting as much coverage? I think a lot of people would say, perhaps with some justification, that it's because we're not funding it in the way that we're clearly funding and equipping Israel. But according to Claire Daly, that may not be entirely true. And for subsequent segments, we're going to do more research into what she's talking about. I've seen reports that the UAE, which backs the RSF, I believe it backs that side. My apologies if I'm wrong. It definitely backs one of the factions. Is laundering gold through one of the units there, but Claire Daly seems to believe that the West is funding both sides.
Western media shows two warlords, two rival military factions, ordinary people frightened and fleeing, but nothing explained, no context, no responsibility. The European elites throw up their hands and wonder, how shall we swoop in and save the Africans from themselves? But there's no mention of European funding, external border policies, the financing of state forces to round up desperate people migrating north to stop them reaching Europe. We've removed our fingerprints from this disaster and we pretend it comes from nowhere. I agree that we need peace, but how? As usual, this isn't about what we must do, but what we've got to stop doing. Sudan needs civilian government. Sudan needs economic justice. It needs an end to militarised extractivism in rural communities driven by the circuits of Western capital. That's the cause of the decades of instability and suffering in Sudan. If we stop paying the warlords wages, maybe then the people of Sudan would have a chance at civilian government.
Thank you very much. And now I would.
Okay, so there are some groups that are doing work to try to help the Sudanese people. I did some research on these when we've covered this previously. The International Rescue Committee is a group working in this area. And of course, Doctors Without Borders, as always, around the world doing great work in Sudan. If you want to donate to help. And if you want to research other groups, Charity Navigator is a very good way if you want to make sure your money's not going to pay a CEO's salary while 10% of the money goes to the people who need it. That's a very good place to look. Now, just this week, there's reporting on Doctors Without Borders put out a press release about just absolutely horrific incidents of sexual assault, uh, particularly among children, hundreds of children, all the way down to the age of 1 being assaulted there. Uh, there's an enormous cholera outbreak because there's been a complete breakdown in the medical system. According to the reporting, there are just dead bodies floating in the Nile. So just absolutely horrible. I am going to do more reporting on this, including those stories here and on Jimmy's show next week. But yes, this is something that deserves a lot more attention. And hey, you know what? Since some folks are so concerned about genocide in Africa, maybe they could put some pressure on the Trump administration because these seem like people who, if you sent a plane there, more than 59 people would probably show up to get the kind of relief that supposedly oppressed Afrikaners are getting, who showed up looking quite plump, I must say, at our airport for people who claim to be suffering the kind of genocidal attacks that the people of Sudan clearly are experiencing in reality, not in the fevered imaginations of right wing podcasters and their followers.
Yeah, seems like we should send a few different large planes over there, as many as we possibly can
Yeah.
under that logic. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
so many people around who care so much about genocide on the continent of Africa. Who knew so many people cared about that?
Yeah.
I hope we
Well,
can all come together to bring these people to America.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, this was, Ukraine was our last segment. And at the very beginning of the war, somebody, I forget which of the talking heads, made a point to come on TV and say, this is not like the Middle East. This is, these people who are fighting and dying now, they look just like us.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very novel that there's war in Europe. Very novel and
Yeah.
disturbing that there's violence amongst white people.
Yeah.
The Israel Gaza war, which is now obviously a genocide of Gaza, is, especially just gutting from our perspective, since obviously we are playing an active role in facilitating it. It's a very clear case
Right.
of
It's very the direct line is very obvious.
yes, it's a direct line, and it's a clear case of good versus evil. You have just an occupying power just treating an occupied people just with absolute mercilessness and brutality. But also in that conflict, we have to remember that, our eyes are on that, and we are invested in that to the extent that we are. By we, I don't mean the pro-Palestine faction. I mean the United States, because it involves Israel, because it involves a white settler colonial state. I mean, there's horrible violence between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. That was a genocide. That was a genocide between two brown
that was
peoples.
also ignored.
And that was also ignored, right? That was a genocide where there were no white people on any side of it. And so that also got ignored. There are slave markets in Libya. Again, those aren't white slave owners, so we don't hear about it, So, our investment in these different conflicts, in these different war zones, really depends on the involvement or lack thereof of white Europeans, quite frankly. I mean, that's what it is, and this is why much of Africa goes.
It's true. If this were a war between
overlooked.
Palestine and Jordan, you wouldn't get this kind of coverage.
Exactly. And so, if there were a white European party committing an active genocide in Sudan, it would get coverage. And if there were obviously a white population being genocided themselves, well, it would get coverage. It gets coverage even when it doesn't happen, right? Yeah. Even when Donald Trump says there's a genocide,
the mere suggestion of it,
right? Just the mere suggestion of it. And so what that really is reflective of is just a bias that sort of runs underneath everyone, I would argue, almost to a person, throughout the Western world, which is a certain underlying expectation that, oh yeah, in those less civilized quote unquote places, this is normal, right? And it's not normal when it happens amongst white people, which is what that guy articulated on TV that day. Hey, these people look just like us and they're killing each other.
Like us.
Since when? Since when does that happen, right? Whereas when these things happen in Africa, I think there is a sort of broad, unspoken assumption that this is actually not out of the ordinary. But this is obviously very much out of the ordinary. Obviously, these are historic, just genocidal acts of violence. You can call it a civil war, or you can call it a genocide, but the scope of the violence is really the same.
Right. And going to what Claire Daly is saying, there's a tendency in the West to, whether articulated or not, and increasingly we come across people who are perfectly willing to just say it straight out. They consider non-white people inferior, and they
Right.
believe that they have these problems because of their inferiority,
Right.
not because of what the West has done to their resources, has done to their governments, has done to their societies. How many people really know what was done to Haiti to turn it into what it is today? If you talk to many of the same people who think there's an oppressed population in fucking South Africa, of all places, an oppressed white population, they'll say, "Yeah, look at what happens when they're in charge of a country."
Right.
You
Right.
hear that all the time from these
Yep.
people.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh
they
yeah.
have no, for them, there is no history, nothing happened. The West never forgave Haiti for having a successful slave uprising.
Right.
And by the time the new liberal attitudes arrived, the society had been bankrupted and attacked by the West for 200 years. It's too late by then.
Please clap.